Hi everybody and welcome back to Greater Manchester Stories. This episode's amazing guest is a lady who reached out on Twitter and wanted to speak about a gentleman called Michael Parnell. But first of all, let me welcome Sheila Oliver to the show. Thanks for coming, Sheila.
Good afternoon. Thanks for inviting me.
When you messaged me, it sounded a very strange case altogether. And luckily you sent me a website that I went on and looked at the information. It, again, it's one of those stories that if you'd not collated the evidence and put it online, there's a very good chance I'd have said, you're exaggerating here, you're making most of this up. It's that unbelievable.
It is
So,
unbelievable.
no, absolutely is. And people watching this will find out how unbelievable this is. So
Mm.
let's start at the beginning. So first of all, who was Michael Parnell?
Michael Parnell and his lovely wife adopted two young little girls who'd had a terrible time with the birth parents. Initially, the girls were getting counselling, which they needed, and then Stockport Council stopped the counselling, although after adoption had paid them £60,000 to pay for counselling for people like this. It just stopped. So Mr. Parnell asked for help for his daughters for a decade, and they got no help. They just stonewalled. So he decided to stand on the town hall steps at Stockport until the council helped him, and they just continued ignoring him. Sometimes he was there night and day. He held up a sign saying, "Hello, how are you?" So he didn't approach anybody. He let people come to him, and then he told them his story.
Let me
After,
just let me just jump in there. So basically, we have a man and his wife who did the most decent thing anybody could do and adopted two children who didn't have parents for whatever reasons. He took them into his home, which saves the state hundreds of
exactly,
thousands of pounds. He was
exactly.
under the impression, and we would all be under this impression, that he would get some help and support off the council, and they just abandoned him.
Yes, and one of the girls had the wrong details on her birth documents. So if he took her to A&E, she didn't exist, and he wanted that correcting, quite understandably. When they found out he was dying, they did do that, so they could have done that years before.
So one of the big campaigns that's been going on for a couple of decades now is trying to convince people to be foster parents and adopt children. And let's be honest, if you're in the foster system, you there's a reason why you were there. That doesn't mean you're a bad person, doesn't mean your parents were bad people. It just means you've got a complex life. And I can't believe we had a man who was so kind-hearted to take
He was.
children into his life and into his home. And well, it doesn't surprise me that the council's incompetent. So that's what he did. So to get help and support, he decided to petition the council and try to gain some attention by holding a sign peacefully. Let's
He was always peaceful.
always peaceful. So let's talk about that.
So there was a new leader at Stockport Council, and in the council log, that new leader and an executive councillor are saying, "Why can't we stop him protesting?" And the other executive councillor was an ex-policeman. After that, instead of ignoring him, they started arresting him. They arresting him for using the town hall public toilet. They arrested him for trying to leave a council meeting before the end. They made that an offence for him. They accused him of assault with a sneeze. They had CCTV proving it hadn't happened. They wouldn't allow it to be shown at his magistrates' court trial. One of the executive councillors was chief of the magistrates. When he came to ask a council meeting, "Why can't I have the help I deserve?" They just called the police and arrested him. And at no time have they any evidence that he was rude or offensive or aggressive. He never was. If they'd had that evidence, they would have produced it. There was no such evidence.
Right, just for people watching, let's make this perfectly clear. I'll ask you a series of questions. Did he ever assault anybody?
No,
Was he ever verbally abusive to anybody?
no, he was incredibly polite. He based his protest on Brian Hoare, the peaceful anti-war protester in London. He was a very gentle man. And the council, I say, would have produced evidence on CCTV if they had it.
So he was protesting the council, and let's be honest, this was probably embarrassing the council.
It
Might have been
was.
annoying for certain councillors.
Yeah,
Might have even made them feel some shame and regret. But rather than address the problems that they'd caused or not lived up to the expectations he had of them, rather than dealing with that, it sounds like they persecuted him.
they did. And then somehow they had the assistance of Stockport CPS and Greater Manchester Police, who should have said, this is insanity, stop wasting our time. And can I also say there were two terrible cases in Stockport. There was a teenager who jumped from a tower block, and there was Alison Davis who jumped from the Humber Bridge with a young son, Ryan. And after those serious case reviews, Stockport Council said they would help people who came to them asking for help for troubled children. Well, they did the opposite.
They didn't.
And I couldn't believe what he was telling me. It was too unbelievable. So one day I took the day off work and went to sit in at one of his trials, and it was awful. Mrs. Parnell had taken smart clothing. He'd come from prison or a police cell. He hadn't come from home for the trial. She'd taken lovely clothing for him, shaving stuff. He hadn't had access to it. That he appeared in court very, very unkempt. It's just mind-boggling, really, that they would do that to an innocent man.
Let's talk about one or two examples of what happened and how he ended up in jail. So you talked a minute ago about he got arrested for sneezing.
They said he committed an assault with a sneeze, which is just ludicrous. It absolutely is ludicrous. He went to prison several times. He was under, at other times, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. house arrest. He was tagged. He could never go and see a dentist, couldn't see his elderly mother on Christmas Day. It was so ridiculous. And I was telling them every night, I was emailing them and saying, why is this happening? You're going to kill this man. He was repeatedly in Forest Bank, and the prisoners were disgusted by the councillors, hardened prisoners. And also, Mr. Parnell said a lot of the young men in there were completely innocent anyway.
So it's from looking at some of the evidence on the website, which if you look at the description of this video, I'll put a link to the website and you can check out all this information and all the evidence yourself. Just don't take our words for it. Go have a look what happens. So the fact he was arrested and up in jail was not because of his protesting, but because they got injunctions out against him to keep him away from the building. And then because he wouldn't be cowed by that, he still attended the town hall steps to protest his case. And that was the excuse they needed to arrest him. Breach of court orders, and then ended up in jail. So for people thinking, oh, he was in jail, he must have done something really bad. No, no, no. He was in jail for breaching civil orders, trying to fight his case, and ended up in jail because of that.
Criminal aspect.
Criminal aspect. And if we compare that, I mean, this started 15 years ago, but if we can compare that to today, when Extinction Rebellion can block bridges, can stop people driving down roads, where they're throwing soup and stuff at paintings, where we have 100,000 people marching for Palestine, and part of the group are anti-Semitic and shouting slogans that are against the law. If we compare what we do to them, which is nothing, and then we compare it to one man fighting basically for his children, fighting for his adopted children to have a better life. Sometimes I look at us as a nation and as a government and think we've got all our priorities wrong here.
Well, he told me he was learning law from a lawless council, and it was his entitlement under the Children Act to have that help for his children. How I hope they realise how much he loved them. He loved them so much. And the council were trying to say, call the police to them, but he would never do that. Never, never. However troubled they were, he would have never done that.
Well, this is the irony of the case, because some people would have said, you can have these kids back. But he was fighting for those children as if they were his children, because they were
They
his
were,
children in
they
his,
were
they
his.
were his children. He was fighting for them. And I mean, I've heard some appalling stories in my 30-year career, but this has to be one of the worst when you've got a decent man doing the right thing, fighting for his children, and the state, the government, turn him into a criminal in the law's
Yeah,
eyes and
yeah.
lock him up. And let's fast forward. Did he ever get any extra support for his children that he was entitled
No,
to?
he never did. And also, he had an illness called Barrett's esophagus, and it can turn cancerous if you're subjected to stress. Well, he was constantly subjected to stress. And they knew he was dying in the end, age 58. After I kept embarrassing the Chief Constable Fye on Twitter about what was going on, the police eventually stopped arresting him. And then the council were making up fictitious arrears. So they were taking money, council tax money from present years, saying he owed it from previous years. So he's constantly in debt. I've got all his council tax documents. He didn't owe any money at all. And he was classed by the council as a vulnerable council taxpayer. So how they treat the more robust ones of us, I don't know. So they carried on prosecuting him until he died, and he had an operation booked at the Christie for his stage 4 throat cancer, and the council were taking him to court on that day. They knew he had cancer on that day for council tax arrears, and he was crying to me saying, if I don't go to court, they'll have me back in prison. So on the day, there was no surgeon to do the operation. So the operation was cancelled. He went to the court and the case was thrown out in 10 minutes. They knew he had terminal cancer and they still did that to him. And and you might say, why do I keep banging on at him? As he was dying, I promised I would tell his story. And also, some of the councillors involved are back in control of Stockport Council. Some of those who called the police when he was just asking a council meeting question, and I used to beg some of the bobbies not to arrest him, and sometimes they listened. 2 of the culprits are in the Lords, and one of the councillors was arrested for alleged child rape of an 8-year-old child. So is it going on now for other people? Are they abusing their power to silence other innocent, gentle people?
I think the answer is yes, and not because of this case per se, but when you give people power, humans are corrupt at heart, and they will abuse the power, and that goes for any power we're ever given, because we're susceptible abusing it on our behalf. So it happens in councils, it happens in NHS, it happens in business, it happens everywhere. But we try to put barriers in place and safeguards in place to make sure it doesn't happen. If this can happen to that man, to Michael Parnell, that can happen to him. It can happen to anybody. And when you just said then, why are you fighting this? Why are you still talking about this? Well, the answer is you don't need a reason for why you're doing this. Because if we let them get away with this, me and you could be next, somebody else will be next, somebody else will be victimized. It's only when we hold the powerful people accountable do we send a message to the country going, we will not tolerate this.
We have to fight back. We have to.
So what year did Michael die?
2013, a decade ago.
He died. And at that point then, he got no help for his children. He was still being persecuted. He was classed as a criminal. He still had outstanding court cases, which would have been wiped off because he died.
And his good name meant everything to him. So that was a real assault on him. And after he died, Greater Manchester Police, to my astonishment, admitted he'd been completely innocent.
And is that letter on the website?
Yes, it is. I have that email.
Well, there you go. People, go to the website now. Links in the description. Go find that letter where Greater Manchester Police finally admit that the man they've been persecuting, who's now dead, was innocent all along. Absolutely appalling.
It's not just the police, it was Stockport CPS. And one of them at CPS Stockport said, because Mr. Parnell's crossbow stopped him entering Ponsonby House. Ponsonby House was knocked down and a £12 million building put in its place. And this CPS official said the new building was the old one renamed so that they could keep arresting him. A £12 million building was the old one renamed.
Yeah, failures on the council, the CPS, and the police. I mean,
and I told everyone.
Yeah. And this will still be happening to somebody now across the country, because
Yes.
when you give these organizations so much power, I speak to people all the time who say things to me. If we could solve that problem, if only we gave the council more power, we could solve this if we gave politicians more power. And initially, that sounds like a good thing to do. But what we all need to remember is the more power and rights we give away and we give to elected officials or civil servants, the less free we are as an individual, because they will be abused at some point. Almost every new piece of legislation, here's a good example. In the 90s, we created new legislation around terrorism. Why wouldn't we? Because we need to be careful. And then within years, the police are using that same power now on the general public under the Terrorist Act. When they know that person is not a terrorist, is not suspected of being a terrorist, but we're using those powers now to penalise law-abiding or sometimes criminal people in this country. But that law wasn't created for that purpose. It was created to deal with terrorists who are trying to blow us up. But every new piece of legislation will be perverted at some point and be used as a new tool to hammer someone else. That's what we need to be really careful of in our country, and the unintended consequences of thinking we're doing the right thing for the right reasons, but then other people use it for their agenda. And Michael just seems to be a perfect example of that.
Oh, he's a lovely man. He's a lovely man. And thank you so much for letting me tell the story. And I won't shut up until the day I die, because it needs telling, and I promised it.
It does. And if by some chance I'm elected mayor, get back in contact, because it's the sort of thing I want to be looking at once I'm in a seat of power, because we need to hold people accountable. Doesn't matter if it's 20, 30 years ago. And let's say all the people, I know they're not, but let's say all the people are dead and are retired now. That doesn't matter. We need to make sure the people in power now know it doesn't matter 20 years down the line. You're never safe if you've been abusing your power. We will eventually come for you. Same with the grooming gang scandal. We need to make sure people understand we will come for you one day. Once we have the right person in power, you're not getting away with this, even if it's 20, 30 years down the line.
Yeah. And however powerful your friends are.
Exactly, because you shouldn't be more powerful than people. The people are the ultimate power in this country. Sheila, thank you for coming on and having this conversation with me.
Thank you, and I hope you get elected.
Thank you. It's a long shot. But hey, we've all like Michael did. You don't get anywhere unless you try. And just because it's stacked against you, just because you're up against the council, the CPS, and the police, Michael didn't back down and turn into a coward. He said, "I'm still fighting. I'm fighting all the way," and that's the sort of spirit I've got. I probably won't win the mayor election, but I'm fighting all the way, because if I don't fight all the way, I'm just as bad as everybody else. I'm a coward, and I try to live my life not as a coward.
And you're telling the truth, so.
And the truth's powerful. That's all we can do.
Yes, it is. I really appreciate everything you've done. Thank you.
You're welcome, and I'll speak to you again soon.
Yes. Okay, bye.
Thank you. If you like that video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and comment. And if you like what I'm saying about running for Mayor of Greater Manchester, then stick around. Tell your family, tell your friends. The only way I'm going to have a chance of winning is a grassroots movement. So be part of that movement and hit that bell. Thanks.